Over 100 years of aviation development, many unusual aircraft have been created. As a rule, these machines were distinguished by avant-garde design solutions and were not mass-produced. Their fates were bright but short-lived. Some of them had a noticeable influence on the further development of aviation, others are forgotten. But they always aroused great interest both among specialists and the public. On June 8, 1966, the American supersonic bomber XB-70 VALKYRIE crashed, colliding with an F-104 fighter. Together with the Valkyrie, the dreams of a whole generation of American designers who dreamed of a superfast and invulnerable machine were shattered. In just a few years after World War II, the face of strategic aviation changed unrecognizably. By 1954, the U.S. had a whole array of the latest bombers. Even recently flying over Japan and Korea veterans B-29 replaced 10-engine, 6-piston, and 4-jet, intercontinental B-36. The jet-powered B-47s dared to make reconnaissance flights over the territory of the Soviet Union. The first B-52 giants took to the air, but no one yet knew how long they would have to serve. Convair was developing the B-58 Hustler, the first bomber capable of reaching 2 speeds of sound. But the rapid advances in aviation made one wonder about the near future. Yes, the United States had great machines now, but what would happen 10 years from now in 1965 and beyond? Curtis LeMay, the legendary head of the U.S. Air Force Strategic Command, had already begun planning a future replacement for the B-52. The B-52's range and bomb load were fine, but their speed was too slow. On the contrary, the speed of the B-58 was above all praise, but not their range, which was sufficient for bombing Canada. That's why the B-58 was supposed to be ordered not as a replacement for the B-52, but as a complement to it. Couldn't we combine the best of these airplanes, high speed, long range, and payload? Thus was born the idea of the Valkyrie. Aircraft designers assured the military that it was technically feasible to build such an airplane. On October 14, 1954, Air Force Headquarters published the basic requirements for a manned intercontinental strategic bomber system. The mention of maneuverability is characteristic. The evolution of technology in those years could well have led to unmanned aircraft. The bomber was to carry a 25,000-pound load for 6,000 nautical miles. The WS-110A's cruising speed was to be 0.9 the speed of sound. In the breakout section to the target, the speed was to be as fast as possible. Once away from the target, the bomber would return to subsonic flight. The military also required the ability to utilize existing runways, hangars, and equipment. Of the 6 firms participating in the competition, Boeing, Convair, Douglas, Lockheed, Martin, North American, only 2, Boeing and North American, were able to provide designs that more or less met the requirements. Both firms proposed to equip the airplane with 2 huge disposable fuel tanks, equipped with their own wings, engines, and landing gear for takeoff. In size and weight of about 86 tons, each tank would not yield to the fuselage of the B-47, itself not a small bomber. The total weight of the prospective aircraft with 4 engines should have reached 340 tons, or even more. One might ask, why do we need long-range bombers when we already have ballistic missiles? However, according to Air Force officers, the B-70 could be in the air within 3 minutes of receiving an alert. And if the warning system fails, the bombers could already be in the air during the threatened period and stay there for a long time. In addition, given the monstrously poor accuracy of first-generation ICBMs, only a man-breaker of enemy air defenses could hit poorly scouted but well-defended targets. According to 1959 calculations, a dozen Minuteman-class missiles, or just 2 free-fall nuclear bombs were needed to hit a VN-12 class target with a 90% probability of hitting it. The bomber could not only deliver powerful bombs, up to 20 megatons, with the highest accuracy, but also change targets at any time before the drop. It could conduct reconnaissance and immediately engage detected targets. Only a pilot could make sense of the myriad contingencies unforeseen in advance. To give the B-70 the performance it needed, the designers chose a new fuel based on boron hydrogen compounds. It gave 40% more energy than the standard JP for jet fuel made from a mixture of kerosene and gasoline. However, boron compounds were, first, extremely toxic, and second, easily reacted with almost anything, even air, usually exploding. Therefore, they would have to be injected after the afterburner, away from vulnerable engine components. The first flight of the XB-70 took place on September 21, 1964. Virtually everything about the airplane's design was revolutionary, expensive, and extremely complex. Only 3 types of titanium sheets were used, and most of the skin was a complex sandwich of stainless steel and foil honeycomb panels. In supersonic flight, the wing tips were lowered, compressing the airflow. The airplane was literally riding its own shock wave coming from the air intake. On September 21, 1964, at 8:38 a.m., the XB-70A, flown by White and Cotton, taxied to the launch, and White requested permission to take off. The aircraft was to make the flight from the factory airfield at Palmdale to the Air Force Flight Test Center at Edwards Air Force Base. During the run-up, the Valkyrie was escorted by 2 rescue helicopters, and in the air its behavior was monitored from a 2-seat T-38. Another T-38 was filming everything that was happening. The nose wheel came off the ground at a speed of 280 kilometers per hour, and in a moment the machine began to gain altitude. Failures began when trying to retract the landing gear. The front landing gear retracted normally, but the main landing gear worked only half of the program. It was necessary to return the landing gear to the initial position. Sometime later, the fuel automatics of one of the 6 engines failed. But this Air Adventure's XB-70A did not end. The biggest trouble awaited the crew during the touchdown on the runway Edwards Air Base. Brake discs on the left strut jammed, and from friction ignited pneumatic wheels. Throughout the 2-kilometer run, puffs of black smoke from burning rubber followed the car. After stopping, the fire was extinguished and the machine was towed to a hangar. The first flight lasted 60 minutes. It took 2 weeks to eliminate the identified defects. On October 5th, the second flight was made. Pilots intended to overcome the sound barrier, and the escort group included Supersonic B-58. The landing gear retracted without comment, but this time the surprise came from the hydraulic control system. A small crack in a tube at operating fluid pressure led to a decrease in system pressure and a switch to a backup channel. Nevertheless, the airplane successfully landed on one of the landing strips of the airbase. October 12th, in the third flight, which lasted 105 minutes, the first prototype of the Valkyrie reached an altitude of 10,700 m and for the first time broke the sound barrier, accelerating to a speed corresponding to Mach 1. At the moment of barrier crossing, from vibrations from some parts of the surface of the aircraft, paint flew off, and after landing the XB-70A had a very shabby look. Some malfunctions became traditional. Thus, in the 37th flight in March 1966, the hydraulic system failed again on airplane No. 1, and the left main landing gear was stuck in the intermediate position. Shepard managed to land the machine jewel-like on the surface of the dried-up Rogers Lake, a run of over 4. On April 30th, 1966, White and Cotton were scheduled to spend more than half an hour at M=3 speed, but after takeoff the nose landing gear support on aircraft number 2 failed to retract. Attempts to return it to the released position were also unsuccessful. This was the most serious accident since flight testing began. If the strut could not be released, the pilots would have had to eject, because during a forced landing long swan neck XB-70A would be inevitably broken. Fuel from the tanks would rush into the engines, and then White twice came in for landing and hit the main supports on the surface of the runway, but the front support jammed thoroughly while the Valkyrie circled in the air, burning a huge reserve of fuel. Engineers puzzled over the solution to the problem. In addition to the 2 hydraulic landing gear release systems, there was also a third, electrical, but it was disconnected from overloads in the power grid. The only solution was to try to short the fuses of the electrical system with a metal object. Cotton took an ordinary paper clip, which was used to staple the sheets of the flight mission, and crawled along the narrow gap between the escape pods to the fuse panel. Opening the panel, he found the necessary contacts by commands from the ground and closed them with a bent paper clip. The nose strut went into the released position. But the next day, The newspapers ran headlines like 39-cent paperclip saves $750 million airplane. At 8:27 a.m. White and Major K. Cross took their seats in the cockpit of the XB-70A. This was the 46th flight of Airplane No. 2 and the first flight of Carl Cross. One of the escort planes, an F-104 Starfighter, was piloted by John Walker. As the planes broke through the cloud cover and lined up to take pictures, the F-104, flying to the right of the Valkyrie, hit the lowered wingtip of the bomber's right wing with its wing, flipped over its fuselage, knocking off both keels, hit the left console, and exploded. The bomber's pilots did not immediately realize what had happened. 71 seconds Valkyrie continued straight flight, then flipped over the wing, went into a corkscrew, and fell. The only survivor was L. White, who managed to eject his capsule in the last seconds before falling. His parachute lying on the ground was spotted from a rescue helicopter 20 kilometers from the wreckage of the XB-70A. Landing capsule with a half-open parachute was very rough. White was seriously injured and 3 days did not regain consciousness. From the bomber itself is not much left. The nose section, in which Cross was, it is believed that he lost consciousness from overloading, ripped into several pieces. The machine probably exploded while still in the air. White recovered, but never flew again. The crash later even made it to the pages of science fiction. The novel Ride of the Valkyries by aviation historian Stuart Slade mentions the collision near the town of Palmdale and its causes. The surviving first copy of the Valkyrie, last flown on December 17, 1968, remains a monument to daring scientific and technical ideas. In 1968, work on the B-70 was discontinued. On February 4, 1969, the Valkyrie flew for the last time.